Today, I'll be going over 10 graphics cards in no particular order that I think are the best value for money. Alright, coming in at number 12, remember, no particular order, we have the GTX 750 Ti. Back in 2014, this Maxwell-based card would have been great for gamers on a budget. Anyways, in 2019, you can expect to get 30 FPS or more in some cases in eSport titles and many others. This card is also very power efficient, meaning no external power is required and it consumes a measly 60 watts, which means you could throw this in a machine that has a lower wattage power supply, and you'd be totally fine. You should be able to pick one of these cards up for $60 or less. Overall, great performance for the money. Next up is another card from Nvidia, the GTX 980. This card was the RTX 2080 of 2014. That's right, a 7 series card came out around the same time the 9 series launched. Anyways, this card requires two 6-pin connectors from a power supply that is recommended to be 500 watts or greater. You can expect the 980 to perform somewhere between the GTX 1060 and GTX 1070. You can expect to find this card for roughly under $200, which doesn't really sound too great, but I've seen it go for as low as $130 on eBay. So if you do some deal hunting, this card is quite the steal. Coming in at number 10, the Radeon RX 460. This card would have targeted the 1050 Ti from Nvidia, but it didn't really seem to perform as well as its Nvidia rival. Though it wasn't the most powerful card for its time, you should be able to pick one up for under $60 on eBay, usually the 2GB model. This card will get you 30 to 60 FPS in most modern games. Anyways, next up is the RX 580 from AMD. This card is another more expensive one that was targeted for the higher end but really never met up to that expectation. Its price has gone down quite a bit since its launch, and you can pick one up for around $100 used. This card will handle just about anything you throw at it. 1080p medium to max settings is definitely achievable. This is a bit more of a power-hungry card, needing at least a 500 watt power supply, but honestly, you could get by with a decent 450 watt unit. For only around $100 used, definitely a great deal. Coming in at number 8 is the GTX 660. This card was released in 2012, and was aimed for the mid-range. This card is basically around the performance of the 750 Ti. It will perform better in a select few of titles, but this is basically a 750 Ti performance-wise anyways. The way this card differs from the 750 Ti is that it eats up 140 watts of power, requires a 450 watt power supply or greater. It's of course a generation older, and the price is also very appealing. I've seen this go for as low as $40, which yes, the non-Ti version of the 750 can be had for that amount of cash, but 1GB of VRAM versus 2, and slight differences in clock speed, CUDA cores, and memory bandwidth make the 660 not a bad option. Though, going back to the 750 Ti, I do believe there are slight differences between the 750 Ti and 660, which I'll put on the screen. Anyways, coming in at number 7, we have the R9 290. This was a legendary card from AMD at the time. It was notorious for its airplane-style cooler, and even doubled as a space heater. All memes aside, this card really is a great option. At the time, it rivaled the GTX 780, which this card managed to put up a good fight against also. Its 4GB of VRAM versus the 780's 3 gave it an advantage. Well, at least until the 780 Ti, but anyways. This card calls for a 550 watt power supply or greater, and will be able to run most titles at medium to max settings. If you can't find a good deal on an RX 580, then you can pick up a 290 for $100 or less on eBay, and I'm not talking about the very unpopular hairdryer model, I'm talking about triple fan thick boys. Next up, we have the GTX 960. This is a newer card, at least on this list from Nvidia, based on the Maxwell architecture. There are two variants of this card, one with 2GB of VRAM and the other with 4. This card will perform similarly to the Pascal-based GTX 1050 or 1050 Ti. So expect to play games at medium to high settings, because this is a newer card that has the luxury of consuming 120 watts and only needing a 400 watt or greater power supply. This card can be had for $80 to $100 on eBay, depending on how much VRAM it has. Overall, great sub-$100 graphics card. Next up, we have the HD 7870 from AMD. Now this card is starting to show its age, but I feel like it can still put up a pretty good fight. Based on the Pitcairn architecture, this was a popular card that offered great performance for those on a budget. This is another one of those loud and hot AMD cards, even with 3 fan cooling on non-reference models. You can expect to get 30 to 60 FPS at low to medium settings in less intense titles. It has a TDP of 175 watts that calls for two 6-pin cables for a 550 watt or greater power supply. You can find these cards as cheap as $50 if you do some deal hunting, but most of the time they go for closer to $70 or $80 on eBay. Next up, we have the GTX 1060. This was and still is a go-to card for budget builds. Before the mining crisis, the price was really good for the performance it offered. This card is based on the more commonly known Pascal architecture. There are two variants of this card, the 3GB model and the 6... Wait a minute. Though everyone tells you, get a graphics card with lots of VRAM, the two don't differ in performance all that much. I mean, now that it's 2019, that's sure to change, but for around $100, sometimes less, you can get a graphics card that will run just about anything at medium to high settings, only needing a single 6-pin cable from a 400 watt or greater power supply. Furthermore, the GTX 760, another Maxwell-based GPU, comes in with 2 gigs of VRAM and 170 watt TDP that requires two 6-pin connectors from a 500 watt or greater power supply. You can expect to get fair performance from this card at lowered and mixed settings at 30 plus FPS. For $60 to $80, not a bad budget option. Next up is the R7 260X. This is a bit of a lower end card, but still has some potential. This card packs a whopping 1 gig of VRAM, or 2 gigs, and has a 150 watt TDP that requires a single 6-pin connector from a 500 watt or greater power supply. For 30 plus FPS gaming at lower settings, this card might be for you, considering it can be had for around $50 to $60. And the final graphics card for this list that isn't necessarily the best is the GTX 1070. Now you might be thinking that, oh, the 1070 doesn't have great value, it's hundreds of dollars. Well, yeah, the 1070 is still way up there performance-wise, which is a good thing, but if you look on eBay and do some deal hunting, you could probably get your hands on a 1070 for around $200 to $250, which if you ask me is great considering the 1070 will run anything at the highest settings and resolution. This card has a 150 watt TDP and requires an 8-pin connector from a 500 watt or greater power supply. Well guys, that concludes my list for the best budget graphics cards of early 2019. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, hit that like button. If you didn't, you know where to go. While you're there, consider subscribing to the channel for more quality tech videos. This is Jeff the Tech Enthusiast, signing off.